Clerk, please read the roll.
Avedisian.
Here.
Buell. Caban. Camilleri.
Here.
DeBella.
Here.
Galligan. Gardeau. Hall.
Here.
Healy. Hoffman.
Here.
Holloway. Iono.
Here.
LeBeau. Lester.
Here.
Magnan. Murata.
Here.
Osgood. Payne.
Here.
Patel. Salemi. Solomonides. Sweezy.
Here.
Taylor.
Here.
Torres. Vecino.
Here.
Carrier. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of the minutes of the meeting of January 23rd, 2019. Is there a motion to adopt? It's been moved and seconded. Are there any additions or deletions? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Abstentions, okay. Item number 5, public comments relative to agenda items.
Judy Allen, West Hartford. Item 9, I want to encourage the board to adopt the increase in the cap for payment for the independent consumer advocate. David Silverstone has been invaluable in interfacing between the district and the MDC. I believe he has done a lot to help with the MDC's public image. Thank you.
Further speakers? No report from the district chairman. Report from the executive officer. I'll let you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a number of issues that I would like to cover tonight, starting with the issue regarding East Hampton. So as most of you know, I've been reporting for at least the last 3 years, talking with the town of Portland as to whether or not they would like to consider utilizing all of their water from the MDC. They use about 60% of the MDC's water, and they serve themselves with their wells and reservoirs for the remaining portion. So, as you know, we funded a $50,000 study that would analyze this for them, and nothing has really happened to date. Since that, we did start to receive phone calls from the town of East Hampton, and East Hampton has been trying to get water to the town of East Hampton for a number of years. They've had numerous studies, and the studies they have were to develop well fields within their ownership for a cost of about $80 million to provide water to the town of East Hampton. We, in discussions with Portland, East Hampton asked if there was any way that we could discuss possibly serving them through the town of Portland. So we had a number of conversations with them, with DPH, and it comes down to money. There's about a 7-mile span between the town of Portland, where we serve, and the border of town line of East Hampton. That 7-mile stretch is about a $32 million project, and then there would be another approximately $40 million of improvements in the town of East Hampton to serve the town itself. The conversations have been really going nowhere, and this is all, as I said, comes down to money. East Hampton has not done anything because they don't have the money to execute the project. They're looking for about $40 million in grant to move forward with the project. In discussions with DPH, they had said that they would consider having a discussion with a $40 million grant with the town, and they would like Portland to be part of that solution because they do not want, as we talked earlier in our earlier meetings, they do not want another well that they have to worry about that might either go dry or doesn't have the capacity. There are wells at St. Clemens, which is along the Route 66 corridor, but that is a challenge to say the least. The town of Portland and East Hampton requested a meeting with DPH, and a meeting was held on January 18th. The MDC was invited along with state legislators from the town of East Hampton, Portland, even Hebron, and Marlborough, and a number of state agencies, including DEEP. The discussion, DPH asked if the MDC wanted to be on the agenda, and the answer was no. This is a meeting that the towns had called, and they're simply looking for whether or not the state is going to give grant and loans. So the discussion went around between Portland and East Hampton about the needs for something, a project of some sort, whether it's the St. Clemens development of those well fields or a possible connection between the MDC. And then they asked, the Commissioner Pino asked if I had anything to say. So I explained what was happening over the last number of years, trying to work out some resolution with the towns. But basically said this, was that the state in 2014 under Governor Malloy, because of the Yukon project, the MDC possibly providing water to Yukon, initiated a state water plan. And 4 years later, the plan is done. 3 years later, the coinciding WUC plan has been completed, and the WUC plan is basically a plan that the water utilities develop amongst themselves with a lot of input from stakeholders in terms of how they serve and what areas are their exclusive service area. So what I said to the group on the 18th was the state water plan and the WUC plan both identify East Hampton as the #1 priority in the state of Connecticut. And what I indicated was, given that, 4 years of work, if the state cannot solve East Hampton's problem, then what good was the 4 years worth of work with the state water plan and the WUC? So the challenge is money, is if it is the #1 priority, then there should be a commitment from the state, from OPM, to provide a $40 million grant so this project can move forward, whether it's with the MDC or whether it's developing the St. Clemens well fields. So that was the discussion. We subsequently, a week later, the commissioner asked if I would come in and talk to him about some more of the details, which I did. That was on the 23rd, and just explained to him some of the nuances, the concerns that Portland has versus East Hampton. Some of the discussion was around whether or not there should be a larger study to talk about some of the other communities, even east of East Hampton. East Hampton doesn't want to wait for a study to be done because they've already done multiple studies, and the answer is the same. We can't afford it without a grant. So they have to do something. They have a manufacturing facility in East Hampton, who from the town manager has indicated they will leave the state of Connecticut if they don't resolve this issue. It's to the point where there's so much contamination with the town of East Hampton, they can't approve residential development. They sign leases with commercial property owners, and when they find out about the water quality issues, they wind up leaving the lease. So there's a significant problem, water quality issue in East Hampton. The state's aware of it, both DEEP and DPH, and something should be done about it through the state water planning process. We would be more than willing to support that as long as the board, I mean, there's a lot to happen. We would have to have referendums, the towns would have to have referendums. There's a lot of work to go into this, but the question is whether or not the state has $40 million in grant. It's really simple. So DPH has committed to supporting that $40 million grant with OPM and the legislature. We're hoping that that happens, but there's really not much else that can happen without that grant money. So we are working closely with DPH on this, and hopefully the state does approve that grant. But again, this is the #1 priority project in the state of Connecticut based on the state plan, state water plan, and the WIC plan, and hopefully the state can come up with that $40 million.
Any questions?
Who funds the other 30 to 40 million?
It would be, so that's the details that would have to get worked out. So the question would be, there's 7 miles of that water main that would be in Portland. So the question is, does Portland pay for a portion of that? Or does Portland get some remedy because they're providing the infrastructure to get the water to East Hampton? So does East Hampton pay for all of it? You know, so those are the kinds of details that the two towns have to really work out.
The MDC paying for it.
No, right. We're not interested in that. The way in which a possible way in which the project gets paid for is that whoever is a customer on that line that would pay for the capital investment is part of the water rate, kind of the way we do our capital investment on our water rate. So, but there's a lot of
Gallons a year would we sell to them if it came together?
So we, the St. Clemens well fields are rated for about 800,000 gallons a day. We have sized, our engineers, Susan Negrelli and her staff, David Banker, have sized a water main, 16-inch water main, to serve about 1.5 million gallons.
$1.5 million?
What's that?
$1.5 million revenue a year, maybe?
Approximately, yes. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Probably 2 million. And that would start slow, but the challenge is, and that's why East Hampton has had a problem, is they can't afford $80 million. They just can't.
Scott, excuse me, would that fall under the category of a shovel-ready project at all? Is it that possibility?
Could. So what we hopefully would need is, we would need a commitment from the state that the $40 million in grant was approved and part of the budget this year. And then we could very quickly, Susan could, and her staff could bring on one of our consultants to design that system.
Because I'm thinking if infrastructure money becomes available,
Correct.
that may be a way that we could think about trying to get that taken care of.
Correct.
Excuse me, Scott. What about the legislature? Can you give me a little bit more relative to, where does this, here you mentioned something about it, that,
Yeah, so
where are we now with that kind of thing?
So, legislator from Portland, legislator from East Hampton was at the meeting. The opportunity was to make them aware of the challenge for this project, make them understand the state water planning process and the WIC process. Right now, it's in the hands of the OPM and DPH
Okay.
to get this funding allocated towards the project.
Right.
And again, given the fact that it is the #1 priority project in the state, you would think it would be easy.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions?
Just one, size of the water main, was that a 24-inch?
Oh, 16, Susan? 16, yes.
Go ahead, Scott.
Okay. I have mentioned this to you in the past. We are working with bond counsel and MDC Legal to develop an MOU between both Hartford and East Hartford. Again, talking to the shovel ready. Our concern is if we don't expect to get the funding for the feasibility study for the dike system approved in 2019, it doesn't make sense for the MDC and the other two towns to go forward with the study, $3.6 million, in hopes to get the infrastructure money later. It's our only opportunity to be shovel ready if money becomes available, but the only way we will get on the agenda with the Army Corps is if the study's done first. So we are working with the towns to hopefully get their commitment that they are willing to move forward in a partnership for the study. We also been talking regarding the Colebrook Reservoir and the dam system up there. As we've mentioned numerous times, the Army Corps dam built in the late 60s. The MDC joined in partnership as what we refer to as the project, which was a 30-year debt service to pay for the dam structure. We've paid for 30 years. 2019 is the last debt payment of $250,000. That project ends. We are also paying a maintenance cost of $850,000 a year, and that is for the use of the water in back of the dam system, and also to allow our hydro facilities to operate. We are now in a circumstance where our hydro its useful life cycle is over, and we need to think about investing more than $6 million in improving that system. We also have learned that in a drought circumstance, again, this water was supposed to be emergency drinking water. In a drought circumstance, there is no water. So in 2016, when we had the drought, there was a mud puddle in the back of the dike system. So we know we don't have it for drinking water in emergency, and we need to invest $6 million in our hydro facilities. So the question becomes, I pose to this board, do we want to continue with that agreement? I met with the Army Corps staff again on January 23rd to explain to them that we are going to recommend decommissioning the hydro units. There's 6 of them, only 3 of them are operating, and so we need to move quickly to be completely out of the hydro business at the Colebrook Reservoir by January of 2020. We've made that clear to the Army Corps. There's a lot of implications if we're not, because then we'll have to pay property taxes. We pay personal property tax over $300,000 to the town of Colebrook for the hydro. So we need to get that decommissioned. There might be a possibility the Army Corps may want to keep some of the infrastructure there, like the cranes and those kinds of things. We would have to go through a process of transferring that property to them. They do have a legal concern, and Chris Stone is working on this for us with Brendan Fox, of whether or not we can actually get out of the agreement. Our position is the project as defined is over, and we do not need the water for any other purposes but to comply with our riparian rights on a regular basis. The riparian rights only cost the MDC $250,000 a year if we did not release any of that 21 billion gallons of water in a year. So if it costs us $300,000 for property taxes, and we can solve the problem with our riparian rights by simply paying $250,000, and we're not making any, we've got to invest $6 million in the hydro, we have no emergency drinking water source, it's pretty simple that the project's over, and we would like to move on. So we have some legal issues to work out. Their attorney has been, adamant that we can't just walk away from the water rights. But they are, when I first started here at the MDC in 2006, the maintenance fee was $120,000, and then this past year was $650,000. So, I'm sorry, $850,000. So the cost is going to escalate. The dam is old. It needs to be repaired. They've actually asked us, Tom Tyler just told me this morning, they're actually asking us to drain Goodwin Reservoir down to almost half level so that they can do inspections. There's going to be a point where there's going to be a major renovation to that dam system, and then if we're there and we're receiving the benefits of the rights, we're going to have to pay 30%. So we don't want to be put in that position. So we are moving forward. The legal issues will be resolved with the Army Corps, but we need to. I've asked the Army Corps, and they're working with our staff. We need to understand how they're going to operate the dike system without us there, because right now we operate everything. We do all the releasing of that water. There's no Army Corps staff that does that. So they're going to operate that dam like a flood control dam, and they're going to release the water as they see fit. and we will still meet our obligations under the Allied Town agreements and our charter and the riparian rights at the face of the Goodwin Dam. It will just be a different, we call it a regime flow. It'll be, the peaks and valleys will be there rather than utilizing the water behind Colebrook just to even out the peaks and the valleys. So we need to understand that from the Army Corps so that we can sit with all of the stakeholders, including DPH, the communities, and the environmental groups such as Farmington River Watershed and the Wild and Scenic. We will do that in good time. I just need the information from the Army Corps so we can sit down and have a discussion about how the flow will actually affect the river. So that's an important thing that's on our horizon.
Are there any questions, buddy?
Two questions, Scott, and I know you've sort of been through some of this before, but with respect to the hydro plant, I mean, the reason that we're not interested in doing this anymore is that the opportunity to create revenues through hydro is just not there anymore, and that's directly the sort of direct responsibility with the state because of I mean, originally there was a premium put on green energy that any energy created without burning fossil fuel, actually the energy companies had to buy that energy. A certain percentage of the energy that they sold had to be created through a green energy. So that's not there anymore, or just the water turbine ones are not considered to be green energy, or what?
Well, so as you know, the state was deregulated back in the early 2000s, 2002, I believe. They deregulated the ability for certain entities to be producers of power, and including Eversource or CLMP. So the rules have changed, and so now what they say is, in order for any clean energy project to be funded through the clean energy credits, you have to be after 2003, after deregulation. So because our hydro units were built in the early 80s, we don't qualify for all the benefits that others will qualify for in the green energy. Bless you. So that's our challenge. And as you mentioned, Commissioner, when we started this project with the hydro back in the 80s, we were getting 21 cents per kilowatt hour. Today, we're getting 3.5 cents. So the payback, if we were to invest $6 million, you know, the payback would be 25 years or so. And so the benefit is not there. The water's not there when we need it in an emergency. It's cheaper to pay riparian rights outright at $250,000. Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense for us to be there.
Well, for the hydro, it doesn't make any financial sense, and that's strictly not the MDC maintained them. They operated the whole time we've had them. It's just you can see how much the payback has changed dramatically since I came in '89. I think we were just turning them on then,
Yeah.
you know, somewhere around there, and they're not forced to buy this anymore, you know. So, secondly. The operation of the dam itself and the release of water through the riparian rights things. In the original construction of the Goodwin Dam, the dam was built with, and a tunnel has already started, was built with the ability to transfer water from the Goodwin Reservoir to Barkhamsted. And in case Barkhamsted ever, you know, had a problem with supply, or the demand, you know, increased and need to be supplied from two reservoirs, from the West Branch Reservoir also. And so they have not given, in other words, they've sort of taken that away. So the possibility of the MDC using that water for what it was originally planned for, the reason we built the dam, is not there anymore. That's the other, if you could just talk about that just briefly. I mean, we're not going to give up on something like this. But you know, if we're going to, all the benefits to the MDC's customers are taken away. There's not much point in us sitting there and holding on to this liability for really for nothing. But go ahead. And
Yeah,
explain.
so the history of building the Goodwin Dam, which was planned really in the late 40s, was to build a 6 billion gallon storage basin for emergency drinking water. And then the 1955 flood hit, and the Army Corps realized that they need to have some way to control the flow at the Farmington River. When they built the Colebrook Reservoir above, a mile above our Goodwin Dam, they cut our 6 billion gallons in half. And the logic was that we'll do this and we'll give you water behind our dam as long as you join in the effort and pay 30% of the construction costs and 30% of the maintenance costs. So we did agree to that, and that's the way we've been living together per agreement since '67. The challenge is that the way in which the Army Corps Dam has to operate, which is all of the water comes into the system in the late spring, early summer, and they have to release water behind the dam so that they can gradually release water so they don't create flooding, completely contradicts drinking water reservoirs storage. You store everything you possibly can. You don't want to release water. So, the fact that the Army Corps Dam was built almost inevitably said our reservoir will never be a drinking water reservoir. So 2016 really reminded us of that, because we're required to release a minimum of 50 CFS over the Goodwin Dam every day, whether it rains or not, which is 32 million gallons. We did that throughout the entire season in 2016, and by doing that, we significantly lowered the water elevation in our Goodwin Dam, which has basically 3 billion gallons of water in it, significantly to the point where it got dangerously low. But also, it eliminated all of the water behind the Army Corps Dam, because they're releasing water, and we had to release ours. So the answer is, do we really need an emergency drinking water source? That will never be one. And we've proven the only time we would need it would be a drought like 2016. In 2016, our drinking water reservoirs never got below 75%. That's one fact. But yet, our emergency drinking water source was dry, right? It was a mud puddle. So our water consumption is dramatically going down, just like every water utility over the country. We're losing anywhere from 1% to 2% a year. Even though population growth rises, water consumption is going down. So do we really need that reservoir? In my opinion, the answer is no. So we'd like, we are going to bring this to the board for their full consideration, but we're just doing fact-finding now and working with the Army Corps.
All right, thank you, Scott.
You talked about
Tom?
riparian rights where you'd have to pay $250,000. Is that on a yearly basis, or is that
Yes.
one time?
Yearly basis.
And why would we have to pay it if the riparian rights are still being handled? The water's still going to be released. The Army Corps is going to do it, right?
Yep.
So why would we have to pay that on a yearly basis if we're still releasing water, or water is still being released?
Good question. So the answer, Commissioner, is how we've been doing it since the 70s. So they call it flow regime. So there's a legal argument that the 21 billion gallons of water that we owe the riparian rights is built into the water we already release under our minimum stream flows. So we release a minimum of 50 CFS up to 150. And there is a legal argument to say that the 21 billion gallons is within that water we're already releasing. Unfortunately, the way we've been operating since we started this project is that it's been in addition to. So the 21 billion gallons has been above and beyond this minimum stream flow that we are required to under our charter, which started out with the Allied Town Agreement, the Hogback Commission. It started, and so because of that flow and how the regime flow, how we've been doing it forever, it in a sense sets precedent. And so the riparian rights mill owners, well, there's now only one left, they want that water in the summer when there's no flow. So that's how we've been operating, and I don't disagree with you. There could be an argument that we're already giving it to you under those minimum stream flows. But unfortunately, we've been doing this since the early 70s this way.
Further discussion, questions? I'm sorry, Denise.
Is there, would a newly formed entity be able to avail themselves of the clean energy tax credits? I mean, is like there any natural buyer for this property that would?
So that's a good question. So we looked actually into, we talked to the state and the entities and the power company, and what they have told us is, our position was, look, if we mothball Colebrook and it sits there for 2 or 3 years, and then we decide to renovate it and bring it back up, everything's brand new, would we be considered new past the 2003 deadline? And the answer was no. So because it exists, we would not be capable of getting those credits. We believe it would be the same thing for anybody who took it over, but we haven't had a deep dive discussion on that with them. The challenge is going to be, as long as that takes to figure out, if we're there after January 2020 and we own this stuff, we're going to be hit with taxes, and the Army Corps is going to say, but you're here, so you have to pay us another $850,000 in maintenance cost. So our position is we would get out, decommission and get out. Now, we're still going to run our hydro units at the Goodwin facility, and we'll have that same discussion when that life cycle is in question. But that facility is a different type of facility. The hydro units are not submerged in water; they're actually in a building, so they're easier to maintain. So it's a different animal than the hydro units at Colebrook.
Maybe I'm missing something. What are we paying $250,000 for? If, irrespective of whether it's included in the minimum stream flows or not, what are we paying for? I mean, and who gets it?
So a little history lesson. So 1913, we built the Nepog Dam. And when we built the Nepog Dam, we dammed the streams that fed the river. And so the argument was in 1913 that you need to compensate us some way, somehow, for that water that you're starving our plants from. And that's why we built the Lake Madonna. So Lake Madonna was used in part to release that water from a reservoir that would be, when they called for it, the dam owners say we need water at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they shut it down at 4 o'clock at night. So that's the way it was operated with Lake Madonna. And then as we built, the infrastructure at Lake Madonna is not such that you can modulate it. You can't. It's a 30-foot diameter culvert that goes under the dam, and you just can't regulate it well. So when we built Goodwin and the Colebrook Reservoir, we've used that in conjunction with Lake Madonna to meet this burden of this 21 million gallons a year, a billion gallons a year. So that's kind of the history of, we starved the river, the mill owners, they want the water, and that's what we're we've agreed to compensate
So we're
them.
compensating someone who doesn't exist.
Well, actually, there is one company still
No,
left.
there's one company,
Yes.
but still, we're
Stanley.
paying $250,000 a year
Correct.
for something that existed, many
Yes.
decades ago,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
and doesn't exist anymore. I don't understand why we haven't changed this somehow.
Well,
Who are we
so,
paying? Who's actually getting the $250,000? Who's the
well,
payee?
they don't get any money unless we don't meet their rights.
Their rights.
Their rights. But the power company, Brendan, is,
It's Stanley Works, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's the Farmington River Power Company, which is Stanley Works.
Stanley Works.
The water flows down to the Rainbow Reservoir. And they're the last of 4 original parties to the agreement. But as Scott just said, we only compensate them $250,000 if we are unable to provide the minimum stream flow.
All right, so it's not an annual cost, it's fixed.
no. But the point, Commissioner, is that if you, it's cheaper for us to just pay the $250. Now, to your point, if we get to that point and we decide that we're moving forward with this, with the board's approval, then we will have the opportunity to sit down now with Stanley and possibly renegotiate that.
Thank you.
Right. And this is, if you look at the history of the Farmington River and the history of the Metropolitan District relative to agreements we made, both riparian and to the communities, for flood control, and the billions of dollars we've invested in that river and our water source and our reservoirs and our dams and everything else. This is an investment that was made by the communities of the greater Hartford area. And one of the arguments that constantly seems to be raising its head is a question of, what is it, public trust. There's been a major investment that these communities have made in this part of the state of Connecticut, and the argument that the water doesn't belong to MDC is a difficult argument to accept when you consider the investment that these communities, the communities of the MDC, not just the city of Hartford, but all of the regional towns, and the providers of service that MDC provides service to, have made investments in this, and it's a significant capital investment that's been made by those communities. So there's a lot of history here and a lot of issues that we as a public trust have an obligation to protect. Further questions? Go ahead, Scott.
Okay. Just a point, there's an article in the paper, and I think we have a copy for it in the clips, regarding Great Ponds. They are moving forward with building 230 units. So that's a positive thing for the MDC. I would like to talk,
I
and
have just one question.
Sure.
How many units is that?
230.
230. That's all part of the expansion of the water service that goes up through Windsor into that area that we were questioning that we were doing it for another purpose. It was for a long-term purpose for economic development in that community. So just
Yep, that's correct.
our planning, that's the process that we had started 10, 15 years ago to meet the obligations in that area of Windsor, not to sell water to Niagara.
Bart had touched on this topic in our last meeting, but as you know, the viability and the affordability of our clean water program is significantly dependent on grant and loan program from the state of Connecticut, DEEP, the clean water funding process. We have been authorized to spend $1.7 billion through a referendum, and approximately a little less than half of that would be grant from the state once we're done. So as part of our analysis, our cash flow analysis, our rate structure for the special sewer service charge, we call it clean water charge now, that has been calculated based on what we expect to spend, when we expect to spend it, and how much grant and loan we expect to get. So if you are aware, we are building our first tunnel, CSO/SSO tunnel, which is starting in the Hartford South Meadows, and it will go all the way to West Hartford, town of West Hartford. Our expectation, we had to divide that contract, it was so large, into 5 contracts. And the first contract was a very small utility relocation contract. The next contract we call Contract 2 is the tunnel itself, and the bids came in at $279 million, Kelly, roughly? 89. Yeah, 89, in that range. So that's the largest component of the 5 contracts. We received 48% grant on the tunnel contract, which was wonderful. And then the expected other 3 contracts make the tunnel work. So you have, imagine a pump station. You have to have a 250-foot deep pump station that will pump the water up to the treatment plant at the South Meadows. And then you have to have the way in West Hartford and in Hartford to collect the overflows and get it to the tunnel. So contract 4 and 5 will do that. One is in West Hartford, one is in Hartford at Franklin Avenue. The West Hartford contract will collect the overflows that are going to the Trout Brook. The Hartford contract will collect the overflows that are going to the Weathersfield Cove. So all 3 of those contracts are very important. They're also part of the consent order, consent decree, so there's deadlines that we have to meet to actually be in compliance. In April of 16, we brought this issue to the board. We were looking for the state of Connecticut DEEP to commit to us that we were going to get the grant and loan that we were expecting for all 5 contracts, even though we were only bidding contract 2. And our concern was, if we go forward with contract 2 and we don't get the grant and loan that we're expecting for whatever reason, political or financial, our customers are going to have to pay more. So we went back and forth with council and with DEEP, and basically they would not commit, could not commit the state of Connecticut, the legislature, the treasurer's office to anything beyond what they had in front of them, which was contract 2. We brought it to the board. The board made a decision based on our recommendation that we would move forward with contract 2, hoping to receive what we expected for grant and loan percentages from the state. So we're ready to bid this month in February, contract 5. Contract 5, our expectation was we were going to get about 42% grant, which would be approximately $13 million. And what we're being told by the state, DEEP, is that they only have 8 total, and they need another bond commission hearing in order for them to receive the money that we are expecting, which is about $70 million total for all 3 contracts. We don't know. The Treasurer's Office has told us one thing, DEEP is telling us something else. We don't know really where the truth lies, whether or not they truly do need a bond commission hearing. We're looking to have a meeting with the Treasurer's Office and DEEP to have this discussion. But the concern is that if DEEP is telling us the truth, that there's only $8 million and they need a bond commission hearing, our concern is there may not be a bond commission hearing for a couple of months with the new governor. We don't know. And if that's true, we're going to have to hold on awarding and bidding this contract 5. I've asked our engineers and our financial advisors what the impact to the MDC would be if we don't receive this $70 million in grant that we expect on these 3 contracts. And I can give a copy of this to everyone. But basically what they have told us is our projection in our rate stabilization fund was that this year the special sewer service charge, is $4.10. We expected the rate for next year to be $4.50. If we don't get this $70 million in grant, that $4.50 next year will actually be $6.50. So add $2 more on top of what the community is already paying. The bigger concern is if there is no grant and loan program moving forward beyond these 3 contracts for the remaining $1 billion that we have to spend for the integrated plan, our expectation is we were going to be in that $7.10 range for the integrated plan. That could go as high as $12 and change. So this grant and loan money is extremely important to us. It's immediate. You know, we could have a $2 increase in our clean water surcharge for next year rather than a 40-cent increase. So we're looking for support from obviously our commissioners, our legislators, our towns. We have actually gone forward, and we are bringing in McDowell Jewett as a communications group for the integrated planning process. We have a number of things we have to do. One is we have to get the plan approved through DEEP. We also would then have to prepare for another referendum at some point. So we are working with them through the CDM contract to help us prepare for that. Some of the staff from McDowell and Jewett actually worked for our CAC years ago, so we have some continuity with them on our communications plan for the integrated plan. So that's a major concern for our communities, our customers that are paying the bill, and it's a major concern. Well, we need it. If DEEP is telling us the truth, we need a bond commission hearing, and DEEP has told us they are committed to asking for enough money to resolve our commitment of $70 million in grants for those 3 projects.
So the first one, first project, contract 5, is the pump station, is that correct?
No, so the first contract is contract 5, which will be a consolidation tunnel. It'll be not a deep tunnel for West Hartford.
West Hartford.
Yes.
So
And then contract 3 is the pump station, and contract 4 is the Franklin Avenue area.
Okay. And you needed, you were going to get 13 million on the.
On contract 5, we're expecting about $13 million in grant, 42% of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? Go ahead, Joe.
We good?
Yep.
Okay. We did have, as most of you are aware, with the Lynbrook backup in West Hartford, there's been a revitalized discussion about what's really happening in West Hartford. It's not uncommon like what's happening in Weathersfield and Newington, but the long and short of it is the groundwater, their private property groundwater is the major reason why in West Hartford on a wet day we get 80 million gallons of water through the system, and on a dry day we're only getting 8. So there's a multiplier of 10, and it's because all of the properties, mainly residentials, are pumping water from their basements, from their foundation drains, from their roof leaders into our sewer system. So our goal is we have a disconnect program. We're mandated by EPA to address inflow. We call it inflow, private property water. And so our way we address it is educate the community, educate the town, enforce our ordinance, insist our towns enforce their ordinances, and we have a disconnect program. So the disconnect program includes a backwater valve to protect the homeowner in the short term, and then also provide a sump pump that would allow that water to go somewhere, and in most cases it's being pumped to a backyard, side yard. In the issues with Lynbrook, there's been an issue with the town in regards to permitting those installations. The town's had legitimate concerns regarding where that discharge occurs, whether it's occurring on a sidewalk or on a driveway, which would create ice during a winter conditions. So we're working with the town to address their concerns, all while trying to abide by our consent decree and consent orders. So we had a meeting this past Friday, which was very productive, and the one thing we've been asking for is, we've talked about this before, we did a pilot project, Greenhurst and 4 Mile, which was we, MDC, actually put in a storm pipe in that street so that the property owners actually had a connection point to a system other than our sewer. We did that, we paid for it, but it was a pilot. We've asked the town to partner with us, prioritize their street flooding along with our integrated planning priorities, and jointly build projects like that where the town's paying for the storm system and we're paying for the sewer improvements. And they've made a commitment to us that they would do that. So they're going to be working with our engineers. In the short term, we have an issue with getting these permits and people disconnected and people protected with backwater valves. The concern we had on 4 Mile Road, if everybody remembers, in March of 2014, I think it was, 2011, we had a major rainstorm which affected a lot of homes, and then there was a prediction of another rainstorm a week and a half later. And so we had numerous phone calls of people coming in saying, we want a backwater valve, we want a backwater valve before the next storm. So the challenge that we have with ourselves and the town's permitting process is to make sure that if someone calls us and asks us for a backwater valve and a disconnect with a sump pump, that we are able to act quickly. We don't want to have a circumstance where someone was in the queue waiting, and because of bureaucracy and a permitting process, they were hit by a storm that we could have protected them from. So the chairman, you want to speak to this?
No, go ahead.
No? Okay, so
There's some questions.
yep,
also.
so we are working closely with the town, and hopefully we can get in front of the town council to make them understand the urgency of this issue.
Ray.
Yeah, doesn't the town of West Hartford have a little more responsibility to the homeowners out there to see that these illegal connections get
It's part of the ordinance.
right? I mean, it's part of their ordinance. This is the city of West Hartford. They have the responsibility to their homeowners, to their residents,
Okay.
to get this done, Scott.
So
You know, we were good. We spent X amount of dollars
Yep.
on those houses where we're not going to get fully.
A lot of money we
Right.
spent on it.
A
So
lot of money. So the city of West Hartford better come on board with this.
they
They
have
have the responsibility, not
they
us.
they have agreed in principle that they would support projects. There's a funding issue that they have to address, but they are probably the extreme to the issue. We have the same issue in all of our towns, but they're extreme because of the
density.
density of the homes. So it is an issue for all of our towns, but we are going to work with them, and they have a responsibility, in our opinion, to enforce their ordinance. We're not asking the town of West Hartford, nor are we going to, perform some kind of martial law where we're knocking on people's doors. But when they do approve renovation permits for people and they're putting a new bathroom in or renovating the basement, we would ask, and we would think that they should ask, this question about this connection of private inflow that, in a sense, violates their ordinance. So we're asking them to enforce that.
Commissioner?
Could you just explain, what's a backwater valve? How does that work?
Yeah, so the backwater valve is basically simply just, if we talk about the water, 80 million gallons of water in a wet day, raining, versus 8 million, right? So on a dry day, the sewer pipe is plenty large enough to handle the sewer that's coming to the MDC. We're in charge of sewer, not stormwater. So when it rains, where's that water coming from? Where's that water coming from that we're measuring, 80 million gallons? Well, it's coming from the basements of homes, and in some cases, because the pipe's old and it's leaking, and that's our job to fix the pipe. And that's what we did on Lynbrook. And when we fixed the pipe on Lynbrook, what happened? It used to act as a French drain. It had lots of cracks in it, so water would leak into it. What happens? We fixed the pipe. And now the water's not leaking into it. So guess what? The groundwater in the neighborhood rises. So now it's a catch-22. Now the groundwater rises, the water's going into the basements, they're pumping more water into the sewer. So
From
the-
their sump pumps?
from the sump
okay.
pumps, or in some cases, it could be gravity, it could just be flowing by gravity. The backwater valve, what it does is, when the system gets to full capacity, it wants to go somewhere. It can't go anywhere but into a house or into the street through a manhole.
Through the manhole.
So the backwater valve simply is like, it's like making the dike higher. When you make the dike higher in Hartford, the water's going to go somewhere else. It's going to go to East Hartford or somewhere else, or Rocky Hill. But it protects the people in Hartford. So as you put in backwater valves, that's why it's not the solution. It's only a short-term solution. The real goal and real solution for our community should be to get the stormwater out.
But the backflow valve is a valve that fits into the sewer pipe that goes into the house.
MDC puts that in, not
Puts
the
it in.
homeowner.
Correct. We actually use contractors to do it, but we pay for it up to a certain amount, and that's part of our contribution to our requirement under the Clean Water Act to pay for that.
But the valve has a flap in it.
Right.
So if it's set so that something from the outside, the street sewer, can't come back and flow into the house. Okay. The problem is, if you open it during a storm, it's going to go the other way. That's
Right.
one of the problems. So you just have to not use your facilities while that's in. But
And our position for Hartford, West Hartford, and all of our towns is when you think about the amount of money that the MDC is spending, and you look at the tunnel that's going to West Hartford, we've said this in the past, we're spending, $600 million to send a tunnel to West Hartford, but it's only going to pick up 2 specific CSO locations so that it doesn't discharge to Trout Brook, right? But it's not going to solve the problems on Lynbrook because the water's backing up. The pipe's not large enough to get everything that's overflowing. That 80 million, it's not large enough to physically get to that location where the tunnel's going to pick this up. So the only way to solve the Lynbrook problems are to get the stormwater out of the entire town and the watersheds above the town.
Scott?
buddy?
Like, we ran this program in Weathersfield like 25 years ago with the backwater. We offered to install them up to a certain dollar amount, and that would protect each one of the homes. But all you really had to do, in answer to your question, right, was figure out the areas where it's possible for it to back up, because there's other areas where it's not going to back up. So there's areas where the gravity flow could allow it to back into your house under certain circumstances, and there are a lot of neighborhoods that are connected to pump stations. The pump station goes underwater or stops or whatever. The same thing. We'd have to protect, the houses from that. And I think the big flood in 1984 showed everybody a lot of where the problems were with the pump stations and everything. But I think Ray's right. I think that we could show like a watershed area of these to each one of the towns and say, this is where we should be doing it. And the towns could easily adopt an ordinance that says that, if you build a house in this area, or if you expand or do anything in this house, that you have to install one of these, and then we'd be there to help and actually sort of manage it and pay for it. But, they don't have to allow permits, to connect, and the MDC doesn't have to allow permits to connect to the sewer system unless that's taken care of. Because those applications come to the MDC. For a new home, they got to connect to the sewer that comes here.
Yeah.
We could tell them that you can't connect unless you put the backwater valve in.
Plus
So I think that some communication with the town that says, these are the areas where we expect this might happen, and some effort by the town to, put together an ordinance to have them do that. But again, like Scott says, that's not going to solve the problem. It's going to keep it from going into your basement, but it's not going to get the stuff moving. It's just going to still be surcharged.
Go someplace
It's
else.
going to go someplace else. So, the point is that the even the Clean Water Project, and as Scott was just explaining, the two big combined sewer overflows, it doesn't fix anything in that neighborhood, because that's where the problem's starting. And
Well,
it
it's-
doesn't relieve the issue in neighborhoods like Linwood, so.
And I would just add that we did meet with the towns. We actually had a meeting with the towns, all of the towns, trying to get them to understand. Some of our towns have ordinances, they just don't enforce them. And some of them don't have any ordinances. So our position on that meeting was, let's create an ordinance that is uniform across the district and enforced uniform across the district. The challenge is, you know, and I'll use West Hartford as the example. West Hartford, you know, has a problem and a challenge with when someone disconnects. It's not about the backwater valve is the challenge. It's the disconnect program. We won't do one without the other. So, because we're paying for it. The disconnect program creates a problem for the town, which is you're going to be discharging more
Carries.
water in a high groundwater table neighborhood behind someone's backyard, which becomes someone's front yard or someone else's backyard. So you're getting problems between homeowners, which becomes the town's problem. And so that's why the towns have not regularly enforced this ordinance.
Denise?
I think this, the whole, where MDC starts and the town ends, that, you know, who's responsible for what, is something that a lot of residents are very, very confused about. And so, one, I just want to thank Jen Evans and West Hartford Community TV for broadcasting this, because trying to get out and inform our residents is the toughest thing, and educate. It was great that we had probably 100 people at that Lynbrook meeting at Town Hall, but there's 60,000 residents in West Hartford. So a lot of people don't understand it. So one, I would say we do a great job with a lot of the MDC Facebook page and Twitter. If we had, you know, a whole write-up on this subject that we could also be communicating in our town. I know I've been speaking with our town councilors. A lot of them were very much unaware of this whole situation.
They're
So-
blaming us.
I know. So there has to be
well-
greater communication and anything that we can do to help educate our residents to what the issue is. But I know whenever someone has a problem, they're like, do I call the town? Do I call MDC? The fire trucks show up to pump out the basement. People think that it's the town. And so it's a confusing issue.
I think it's an issue that we should, from our communications people, look at adding something to the water bills for those specific communities to explain to them what the process is and what the responsibility is. The problem is you're going to get a real flat back from the town thinking that but you've got to put it in perspective and explain to them it isn't an MDC obligation, that stormwater control is the town's responsibility, not MDC's. And, you know, it's going to be a touch-and-go situation. Further discussion? I mean, it's just, when you see a community that on a dry day sends 9 million gallons to MDC of waste, and on a wet day, it's 80 million. That's a significant capacity increase that is impossible for us to handle, or the town. So hopefully, we move forward, because we've had this discussion before in what the two areas we did
4 Mile and Greenhouse.
4 Mile and Green, that there was going to be a cooperative effort that whenever they were talking about doing something, or we were doing water main work, they would do the storm sewers, but that has not been the case. And now it's at a point where we can no longer just say, well, I hope they're going to do it. So, and the density in West Hartford makes it even more significant, which, by the way, is going to have a major impact on property values, and if there's something isn't done about this issue. Don?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to know from our engineering staff, do the towns contact the MDC every time they redo a road over to find out if there's a problem in that area or not?
We actually have a paving program, and we have a couple of individuals that's all they do is coordinate the paving programs of the towns.
So we know.
The challenge that we have is when we typically don't, obviously, we're not expecting a town to put in a storm system on a mill and overlay, right? But when you're reconstructing a road and putting new curbs and you're completely digging down below the substrate of the road, that's the time to have a discussion. And we're aware of it, we have those conversations, but we haven't had the willingness and the funding from the towns to put in that infrastructure while we're doing that. For example, Lynbrook is a perfect example. We lined Lynbrook, right? Now, if we had the ability for the town to put in a storm system at the same time, we might have decided to put in a new pipe rather than line. But because it was simply just a subsurface type road reconstruction, it was easier for us to line. But that's the kind of discussion we need to have with the towns.
But there is some communication.
Absolutely.
And they do check before they remill the roads, the age
Absolutely.
of the piping to see if.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And I think what they should be doing is some long-term strategy to deal with this issue, because it's just going to get worse.
Yep.
And I'm not sure that the approach you're taking, or we're taking, and the town's taking, is going to be anything that's going to be a solution. It's going to be some type of a mitigation, but there's got to be, I think, a stronger agreement between the two parties, because for years we've been blamed for the problem that we explained to them is not the problem of the MDC. So,
Scott.
Yeah.
Commissioner Taylor.
Yeah, excuse me. Perhaps we should give serious thought to preparing and then presenting on the access cables, a full-blown presentation by engineering and the public works people from West Hartford or affected towns, where this matter is laid out in some detail with a clear explanation as to where the dividing lines, if any, are in terms of responsibilities and what is being addressed, funding issues and other things, so that in effect there are two things people can watch, but more importantly, this could be run in the town on a periodic basis, so that essentially people could get a full story, and that way that would help, I think, deal with this, so people can understand who the players are and what needs to be done.
Further discussion? If not, I'm sorry, Senator?
Thank you. Scott, just really changing the subject a little bit. Earlier on in the discussion, you'd mentioned, and it's true that we have a continually, you mentioned the percentage is going down 1-2% per year in terms of the consumption of water. Therefore, our revenues are also depleted by that same percentage every year. I'm wondering, have there been studies on where's the bottom? I mean, you can't go down to nothing because people need water.
Right.
So where is the bottom going to be, and can we project that, and that might help us in our long-term planning?
So the Governor Malloy brought in a Professor Palmer from the University of Massachusetts in 2014 to explain exactly that. In our water facts document that we've provided to the commissioners and we update it on a regular basis, in that report we actually used Dr. Palmer's projections and what he has said, and in that report it shows numerous municipalities and water utilities across the country with what they projected and what they actually are producing and selling today. And every one of those water utilities, including ourselves, can't predict what is happening. The reality is just our example, if we didn't have the special sewer service charge, we probably wouldn't be, we might be declining, but the special sewer service charge is impacting the water bill, and people are not, because it's based on consumption of water, now people are not sprinkling their lawns, and they're conserving even more. So there's just so many different factors. We don't know what the bottom is, but we do know that just practically the largest users of water in a home is a shower head or a dishwasher or a washing machine. Probably the washing machine is the most.
Not anymore.
Right, so a washing machine, an old-fashioned top-load washing machine used 40 gallons per load, and now the front loaders use less than 9. So you're talking about, 4 times. So if your home, just by putting a new fixture in, cut your water consumption by 70-something percent, and then that's not even considering the clean water surcharge and what they conserve. We don't know what the bottom is. And Dr. Palmer, who is the expert on this, has said that in his report.
But one of the other issues is this long-term sustainability relative to the state pension commission that they have had in place for the last year and a half or so to look at the pension costs and how you deal with them long-term to sustain the state's ability to continue to function. One of the options that the committee, not the committee, but it was the outside expert they brought in, and they looked at water and sewer rates across the state of Connecticut. And they picked out MDC by saying that we are substantially lower than other communities in the state, that what they should do is they should bring us up to what everybody else is paying, okay, and take that delta and monetize it and then put it into state pension fund. That was one of the recommendations. I'm not supporting the idea, but I'm saying to you, when they did the statewide analysis, we were substantially lower than everybody else was with the surcharge on the bill. So that if you take the surcharge off, we reduce in half the water bill. Water bill's what, about $3.18 or 19 cents a 100 cubic feet of water.
What is the rate this year? 347?
347, 366, I think it is, or something like that, as opposed to $7 and something. So you can see the impact that sewer, the Clean Water Project is having on both sides of our organization, and that's why we continue to struggle with this and look at how we're going to deal with that, which comes back to the other issue. If we don't have some kind of national infrastructure program, not only us, everybody's going to have a major problem here, and that's one of the long-term problems we look at. Further questions? If not, could you proceed? Are you finished?
Yes,
You
I
had your- you
I
had
am
enough
finished. I
tonight.
would like to say that last meeting I had no comments, so I made up for it tonight.
Okay, there are no further questions. We can move on down the road here. Okay. Forgot where we are. Report from District Council.
I was asked at the last meeting to report to you all on where we are with the state on the landfill. As you know, there is a new commissioner of DEEP. There is a new head of OPM. We have not been able to meet with them. We are meeting this week with our outside counsel to go over the complaints which we have previously drafted. We reported back to the attorneys for DEEP that we would consider recommending to this board applying the same discount to the DEEP balances owed to us and going forward as is being accorded to Pratt & Whitney. We said obviously the board would have to approve that, but we would at least consider recommending that. That was in response to their offer to us, which was a minimal offer.
3 cents or something, no, a penny.
Half a penny.
So we have not heard back from them on that, which is not a particularly encouraging sign. So what I would propose to do is we'll meet with outside counsel this Thursday, the engineers, myself, and Scott. I will reach out. The attorney for the governor is someone I know quite well, Robert Clark, and I will reach out to him to try to discuss this with him. And then if we don't get anywhere with DEEP or
Governor's office.
OPM or the governor's office, will be prepared with the lawsuit for the next meeting. There is nothing to report from the Claims Commissioner. You'll remember that we had filed a claim for money damages. The state made a motion to dismiss that. The Claims Commissioner has not decided one way or the other on that motion. So if he agrees with the state, there is an appeals mechanism to the legislature, which is what we would do. If he decides in our favor, that only means that we have the right to a hearing before the Claims Commissioner, who can then grant us permission to bring suit against the state. So that is not a quick process. That's where we are.
Gary?
Follow up on the Claims Commissioner. Does the Claims Commissioner have any timelines at all?
No.
Sounds like.
See, when you were there, you didn't require. Oh, God. Okay, any questions, any further? I'm sorry, Don.
Bart, you mentioned that you would ask the board if the state wanted to go by the Pratt & Whitney olive branch that we gave out. Have you done that, or?
I have done that.
You have done
I
that?
have not asked this board. They would have to say yes first.
Okay.
And then I would come to you.
Okay, so you have presented that to them?
I have presented
Okay,
that to
thank you
them.
very much.
And our meeting group has changed, so that's why I think we should, the Attorney General is still there. So the Attorney General really was the.
Yes, not the big, not the real
No,
boss, but
the underling, the deputy, what do they call him? Deputy, no, Assistant Attorney General.
Okay. The second issue I have to report to you on is I have met with 2 of the 4 members of the Water Plan Commission. The issue of why we care about public trust, the inclusion of those words into the water plan has come up, and I have met with them and presented to them the legal research as to why we care, okay? And the reason is very simply that they have not defined what they mean by public trust. And if you look at the way different states have defined public trust, there is a very, very wide spectrum of issues that can come up. For instance, if it is raised, who can raise it is the first question. In other words, you say, well, we're going to sell water to somebody, and somebody objects. The question is, who would have the ability to say, no, stop, hold on, that violates the public trust. In some states, it is the Department of Environmental Protection. In some states, it's anybody who can show damage as a result of the use of this water. In other words, somebody downstream who has less water that might impact their business or their livelihood. In some states, it's anybody. And that obviously is a very big difference as to the amount of litigation that you'll be involved in. The second one is, what is the standard, okay, that you use to determine public trust? Now, currently, under the SEPA legislation, which involves when you have to have a SEPA environmental impact statement. Buddy knows only too well about these, I'm sure. But in that, you have to show that you've damaged, especially with water, and that the damage causes an unreasonable impairment. In some states, if you go beyond SEPA, okay, which is the current standard, and say the people can sue, in some states they have a burden that say, well, you as the person complaining have to show that it is an unreasonable impairment. In other states, they say, no, the person seeking the application has to prove that it is not an unreasonable impairment. And so the question is, where do you have to prove that? In some cases, it's to the commissioner of DEEP, and then people can intervene in those proceedings. In other cases, there's local land use boards that you have to go before and show that it's not an unreasonable impairment. In other places, it's the court system. So it can be any one of a very wide variety of things, depending on how you define public trust. And finally, there is the issue that is the central issue for us, is that if you're saying that water is in a public trust, in the 1980s, when they passed all of the requirements that you get a permit when you're using more than 50,000 gallons a day, and DEEP does an evaluation of that, they recognized already registered uses of water. So the MDC at that point had built all the reservoirs, and we were recognized as having a right to use the water that we had in the reservoirs. In some states, they say that if you already are registered, the public trust doctrine doesn't affect you. In other states, however, they say that if there is an issue downstream and you have a registered water diversion, it can be taken away for you or modified without compensation. So that obviously matters which way you define that. In one case, it has no impact on us. In the other case, it could have a devastating impact, because they could say, well, you really should be taking the water from your reservoir and pouring it into the river, because there's an impact on the fish in the river, and you should increase the flow in the river. And so that obviously is of significance to us. So even though the state water plan is a planning document, it is the foundation of what's going to happen next. So if you don't define what you mean by public trust, or what you anticipate happening by the impact of public trust, you're asking for the broadest possible interpretation of this, which would have a true impact on the assets of the MDC. So I have explained that now twice and gotten the arguments back, well, this is a planning document, and basically, don't worry, we're here to help you. We're from the government. Which I have not accepted. You'll be happy to
Are there any questions?
Just one short one.
Tom?
Because it's a state water plan, won't there be a lot of different meanings of the public trust, how it relates to the MDC, how it might relate to another water company and another water company? And then, I mean, couldn't there be multiple definitions? Because I'm sure other water companies might be different than the MDC's definition of, for instance, MDC's definition would be the public trust for its 8-member towns, where another water company in another area of the state could be the public trust for their area.
Yes, and if we define that, there'd be no problem for us, okay? As long as you know what you're getting into. You might not like the definition particularly, but at least you know. But the other issue is that there's a big difference between wells and how we collect our water. And, the reason the issues have come up about drying out rivers is wells. It has nothing to do with us. And people putting wells close to streams and the streams drying up. And one of the issues that I think is fairly raised by the environmental community is, well, wait a second, just because you've got a registration and you have a well there, and you now maximize that well, you completely dry out the stream, you are causing environmental harm. There should be some way to monitor this or change it, and that frankly happened in New Britain. And the better
Right.
solution for them would be, the better environmental solution is to buy water from the MDC so that you don't have to dry up the stream. So, but those are reasonable issues that people can disagree about.
Which,
But,
which we have a standing obligation to sell them, what, 5 million gallons a day or is it
Yeah.
10?
so, and the last thing I'll say is, on the issue that Scott brought up with DEEP and the grants, the problem legally that we're confronting is that, we've issued bonds to go as far as we've gone on the tunnel. And those bonds can't just simply be used to build a tunnel to nowhere, because it has to be a functioning asset, or you could get into trouble with the bonds, being sued on the bonds. And so you do need to do these 3, 4, and 5. You can't just, if there is no grants, stop, okay? First of all, you're going to have tremendous contract claims for things that we've already entered into. But secondly, you have a real problem with bonds. And third, you have the EPA, which can issue fines against us for stopping. So ultimately, you have two solutions here. One is, if there are really three. One is to just simply take the money out of the Clean Water Fund. However, if you do that, you're again running into issues with the bonds, because we've made certain representations as to how those funds would be utilized in our bond sales. Secondly, that fund is designed for the entire project, and you're really going to cause chaos within the entire project if you do that. So that leaves you with two options. One is to immediately raise the surcharge on everybody to pay for this, basically out of pocket. Or the second one is to add it to the ad valorem charge, which you can do, and just pass it on to the various municipalities, neither of which is particularly palatable. But I want to make sure that the municipalities understand that this is either going to affect the residents in a very negative manner by their water bills dramatically increasing, or it's going to affect the municipalities themselves as it goes on to the ad valorem and their taxes go up. So I don't have any other good news to share with you.
Further questions? Okay. Item number 9, Board of Finance consideration and possible action regarding 2019 operating budget transfer, independent consumer advocate budget increase. There's been no action taken by the Board of Finance. It's still within the boundaries of the committee. I would assume they'll bring it up again and discuss this and make a recommendation to the board. Audit committee considerations and possible action regarding whistleblowers policy. No action, the same situation. Both are still within the Board of Finance. B, authorization level for sale of personal property. Recommended action, receive the report and adopt the resolution.
Move the resolution.
It's been
Second.
moved and seconded. Is there discussion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item 11, Water Bureau consideration of impossible action regarding abandonment of water main, Westbrook Village. Recommended action, receive report and adopt the resolution. Is there
Second.
moved and seconded? Is there discussion? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 12, opportunity for public comments. Twice a night.
Judy Allen, West Hartford. I submitted written comments for the commissioners tonight, so I'm not going to go over that now. And for the people at home, those would be attached to the minutes of the meeting, so they would have the opportunity. And I also asked for commissioners to receive copies of the responses I got to the long-term control the comments for the long-term control plan, because I think it makes what I said in the written comments clearer. Probably didn't make any sense. The concerns focus on financial issues and the general response from the district to the public comments on the long-term control plan. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Further comments from the public? Commissioners? Oh.
Good evening. My name is Mike Zaleski. I'm the president and CEO of Riverfront Recapture. Our offices are located at 50 Columbus Boulevard here in the city of Hartford, but I'm also a resident of the town of Weathersfield. I have prepared remarks here, but I simply wanted to, I'm going to not go over those. I simply wanted to thank the Board of Commissioners for their support of Riverfront Recapture in the 2019 budget. The MDC has been a longtime partner of Riverfront Recapture and has allowed us to achieve what we've been able to achieve over the past, I guess it's going to be 38 years that the organization has been around, the last 20 in managing our park system. I have, as we went through the process, the budget process, I was pleased to see there are a number of commissioners who are very familiar with what Riverfront does. There were some that were less familiar, so I would welcome the opportunity to make a formal presentation of the board over the course of the next couple of months, if that is the desire of the commission. I'm not sure whether we've ever thanked the board formally, so I just wanted to show up tonight and say thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Further public comment? Commissioners, questions and comments? Everybody have enough? Commissioner?
Just one comment on the public trust definition. I think one of the concerns that some of us have about it is that if there's conditions on what public trust means, could the MDC at some point decide not to sell water to somebody if someone else offered a higher price? You know, it's just one of the issues that comes up.
The answer to that is we have no ability to refuse people as long as we have enough water to sell. If we did, we'd be able to control development, zoning, and everything else if we had the right to make decisions on who gets water and who doesn't. So our charter restricts us from participating in the merits of what people are doing with the water as long as it's a legal entity. Buddy?
Just to add to that briefly, too, any director of public health in any one of the towns that we serve can direct us to serve somebody with water. They can tell us that we have to, if their well goes bad or if there's some reason, we'd have to serve them. We don't have the ability to reject, one customer over another. So
Can't pick winners and losers, so.
Just wondering whether there's any update on the study in regard to the ad valorem and the work of the consultants there.
Actually, the report is actually due any day. It was actually due Friday. So John has made contact with them, so we're expecting it this week. So once that's been submitted, we'll definitely bring it.
Circulated.
Yes, bring it around to have a meeting with the towns.
And everybody will get
Yep.
our copies.
Thank you.
Further questions, comments? If not, the appropriate motion is in.
Will we adjourn?
Without objection, stand adjourned.
The fellow